Hello, hello, everyone. I am finally back on. Give me just one. Check something on my audio. Just coming back on live after a few weeks. It's so good to be back here. As you can see, it's just going to be me again, holding the space as Rick is traveling at the moment still, and he has no cell connection. So it's just going to be me. So I have gathered a few questions that I would like to answer based on a lot of questions that we've been receiving, that I received in the last few days, of things that we have noticed that typically people are wondering about, and I'll be answering those. But in the meantime, before I get to that, I would like to remind you that we're going to be relaunching. This is going to be the last episode as Wednesday Wellness Show. We're going to be relaunching it with a new name. I really wanted Rick to be here with me to announce the new name, but it doesn't look like he's going to be able to do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and say it. The new show is going to be called An Honest Look. We're very, very excited about this change. It really aligns with us. It's really it really describes us, both of us, and what we are all about and what we're trying to do with the show. So we're super duper excited about that. You will see us post about it. You will see what it's going to look like very soon as we post when our first episode is going to be. It may be next week, it may be a couple weeks from now, but you can stay sure that we will post it everywhere. And you will also see the name of the show as it currently is changing everywhere on Facebook, on YouTube, on our postings. We're gonna just transition into the new name. So if you get on our pages and you don't know what's going on and where the name went, we're just replacing it with a new name. It's still us, same show, same concept, most likely same time, and the two of us hopefully next time. Actually, the two of us next time for sure. So yeah, now that we got that done, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them. You can put them in the chat. I can see the chat. I'll try and multitask as much as I can. In the meantime, I'm just going to go ahead and answer some of the questions that I have received from some of you in previous episodes and in the last few days that I think a lot of people would like to hear about. There's a lot of questions about boundaries and relationships for a very good reason. Those can be a little bit challenging to navigate, so we'll talk about that. When we did our episode on boundaries, was extremely popular. So I will definitely go over boundaries and some of the things we have already spoken about. But as I'm talking, if there's something that you would like me to talk more specifically to, please go ahead and post it in the comments as well. Anyway, so I'm going to start with the first question here. And the first question is how to communicate effectively your boundaries to others. So I would say that in order for me to answer this question, the first thing to do would be to go over real quickly, go over what boundaries are, right? We did a whole episode about this, and it's something that it can be a little bit difficult for people to really understand, right? Because the word boundaries in of itself can really be triggering. So when we talk about boundaries, one thing that I often do with my clients to help them understand this concept and really remove the trigger, we talk about boundaries as guidelines. We talk about boundaries as something that you establish for yourself. Like oftentimes there's this misunderstanding that boundaries are something that we are establishing for others. And it's important to understand that boundaries and the healthiest way to really relate to boundaries and utilize them is to see them as something that you establish for yourself. So, for instance, a boundary would be something that you feel like you are not willing to do, or you're not willing to accept, that goes against your beliefs, that goes against your value system, and you establish that for yourself. You establish that crossing those values and not being in alignment with the value system that you know that matters to you, that you know it's something that you have established for yourself, is something that you're not willing to accept. So you're going to create clarity, first of all, around what those boundaries are and what they mean to you. And that piece of clarity is very much needed, because oftentimes we don't set boundaries, or we just expect people to understand what fits us and what matters to us, without really understanding ourselves, what matters to us and what we don't want done to us, or we don't want crossed. So the first piece in boundaries is really understanding what they are for us, and understanding that they're something that we're establishing for ourselves. And from there, communicating those boundaries, right? By communicating them, again, in a way that are going to be received, communicating them in a way that they're not going to be misinterpreted, communicating them in a way that they don't feel like they're being put on to somebody else, that they're not being imposed onto somebody else. They're not about anybody else but ourselves and how we feel about things. And so a really good way, one of the questions that I did get here is how to set them in a way that it's effective, especially when we're talking about family and we're talking about relationships and we're talking about our loved ones, right? Because that can be really tricky to do sometimes. First of all, because oftentimes we already have established dynamics with the people that are in our lives that we love, and also because we may feel like we're going to hurt them or offend someone, right? So again, the easiest way to do that is to really come from a place where we explain that that is something that has to do with us and not with them. So really communicate that in a way that is very clear, that what we're communicating has to do with how we feel towards ourselves and what matters to us. And of course, anytime that communication is involved in any relationship, the best thing to do is really to use effective communication techniques, right? So again, if you're communicating something that's about you, really avoiding using any blaming, any accusations, any like putting things outside of ourselves. Like I always say, try to eliminate using the word you as much as you can. Always refer to the situation or to the concept that you're trying to portray as this is how I feel, this is what matters to me, this is what would work for me, this is what I would like to agree with you to do, or this is what I would like to this is what I would like to see happening, right? Like always talk about things in terms of you, in terms of what matters to you, in terms of how you feel about things. So that's another really important thing to keep in mind in terms of when you express those boundaries, right? Because the first step is to understanding what they are for ourselves, so creating that clarity for ourselves. The second step is establishing what those boundaries are, and the third step is to communicating those boundaries, right? Communicating to others either what they are or when we feel like they're being crossed, and doing it in a manner that is effective, that it's not blaming anybody else, that is not putting the responsibility on anybody else, but it's just really clarifying what we want to see happening or what we're willing to accept or not. Okay, so that was about boundaries. If you have any questions, please go ahead and post them. I can always go back to them if you post them a little bit later. I'm going to move on to the next question. Let me just see here for a second. Yeah, so again, there's another question about boundaries, right? So how to set boundaries to keep a healthy distance from loved ones. So this one is a tricky one, right? Because this one sounds a little bit like we're at a point where we understand that these boundaries are necessary to create some sort of distance with someone, right? And I'm guessing here, I don't know what the circumstances are, what the situation is, but I'm guessing that there is a level of acceptance and understanding that the distance is necessary in order to either protect ourselves or in order for those boundaries to remain to maintain the integrity of those boundaries, right? So let's say that that's a point that you have gotten within a relationship. Sometimes that happens, unfortunately, with family members or our parents, or when we are just changing. When we are changing and people around us are not changing, or we don't really see things eye to eye, right? And how do we keep a safe distance? I mean, I always tell people that first of all, you absolutely cannot change anyone else, right? All that you can do again is focus on yourself. All that you can do is change your own behaviors where you see fit. All that you can do is see what your part in it is. And if the behavior on the other part crosses your boundaries or doesn't align with you or doesn't feel healthy, you can really create boundaries around the relationship by modifying a little bit how the relationship dynamic is through maybe reducing the amount of time that you spend with the person, maybe just being very specific and intentional about the things that you do share with the other person, the things that you do with the other person, being very intentional about who you even spend your time with, right? And that is sometimes possible, and sometimes that is not possible, right? Sometimes it's someone that we work with. And so we have to really establish some clear boundaries there and really define where is it that we need to interact with this person, what is it that we're willing to accept within that interaction, and what is it that we're not willing to accept within that interaction. And I find in my life that when we do sit down and really take a close look at all those things, oftentimes we really find a place where there are unnecessary interactions that we are having with someone else. There are unnecessary conversations that could be avoided, right? Because, and that always also really is directly linked to our level of understanding of that relationship and our level of acceptance of where they're at and where we are at, right? But I also want to add that sometimes we can also take that to an extreme, right? We can take it to the extreme of saying, well, if you don't align with me, if you don't respect my boundaries, if you don't think the way I do, then I'm going to cut you off of my life, right? That's my boundary and you're out. And I really want to warn people against that, because that can become cancel culture, right? That can become to the other extreme, right? You don't have to take boundaries to that extreme. You don't have to take it as if you literally need to eliminate the other person in order to maintain the integrity of your boundaries, right? You can still interact with people. You can still maintain a relationship by being intentional, like I said, about what and how you interact with the person, and where and how often you interact with the person, or the people that you don't like interacting with, or whose behaviors you don't generally like, right? Because with some exceptions, there, if you really sit down and think about it, there's always a place where you can meet. There's always a place where you have common ground, right? And so instead of focusing on the places where that common ground is missing, on the places where there's disagreement or there's no alignment, you can choose to focus on the places where that common ground is met, where the alignment is there, where the interest is there, right? If it's just work, then you will just keep it to work, if that makes any sense. And in regards to family, hi Yuri, sure. Let me just finish this. Go ahead and type your question in here. I'll be happy to answer it. In regards to family, you know, that's probably the hardest relationship. Those are the hardest relationships where you set boundaries, and you know, it becomes sometimes difficult to have those boundaries, to maintain the integrity of those boundaries, or to not get triggered or not be reactive, right? And that's because those relationships have been there for our entire lives, and they trigger some emotional responses in us. And you know, it's just a little bit more difficult to stand our ground and to really stick to what we have perhaps established for ourselves to be a boundary, right? And so I would say, when that happens, always remember that the only way to change behavior, any behavior, even your own, is through repetition, right? Yes, you create the clarity, you understand and define what kind of behavior you want to change and what you want to replace it with. But always be reminded and remind yourself that we're talking about family. There's likely been a dynamic between you and the family member that's been going on your whole lives, right? And so that pattern, that dynamic is very carved in for both of you, right? And so, in order to change that, it is enough just for one person to modify their behavior, but modifying that behavior, it may take a few tries. It may take doing it over and over and over again a few times. And what doesn't help is to feel, you know, to beat yourself up, to feel guilty, to feel bad about it, to feel like, oh, because I again reacted, or I again didn't have that boundary respected, then I'm not doing things right, or this is not going to work, right? I really want to encourage you to remind yourself of the fact that it takes time, to remind yourself that family members and loved ones are probably the most difficult relationships to modify and change, you know, redirect. And that it is only through taking small, tiny steps every single time and doing it consistently over a period of time that you're going to be able to see some changes. So really be patient. Don't fall in the trap of beating yourself up or feeling guilty or feeling like there is no hope, because that thinking doesn't really serve you. That thinking doesn't really, it just keeps you where you're at. So I just wanted to say that, and I hope that helps. Let me read this question from Yuri live. My friend actually recommends this awesome channel to me. Do you know Joe? He said he knows you personally. What's Joe's last name, Yuri? That would be very helpful. If you have any questions in terms of self-development, in terms of anything, boundaries, relationships, if you feel stuck anywhere, go ahead and ask me any questions. Today is, yeah, okay. Anyway, so if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Anyway, let me see what other questions I have here. Healthy communication tips. All right, so I did do an entire coaching session about effective communication strategies. And, you know, I would say that one of the most important suggestions that I could give you, tips that I could give you about effective communication would be, you know, like oftentimes when we ask this question is because we're either trying to resolve conflict, or we're trying to deliver a message, we're trying to deliver something that we fear may not be received in the way we would like it to. And we're hoping to be heard or understood in the way we want to just convey that. So one of the first things that I would say you could do to get yourself, to set yourself up for success in effective communication. Let's say that the communication that you're wanting to have is around conflict, is around a disagreement that you're having. The number one suggestion that I would give you, the number one thing not to do would be to avoid having that conversation while you feel charged, while you feel like you're having some kind of an emotional response, that you're feeling angry or you're feeling upset or resentful, right? So the very first, because in that moment, if you're feeling that you're responding emotionally, you're very likely to be in fight or flight. You're very likely to be in a narrow focus state of mind. Your brain is in a place where it's not really able to see any alternatives, any options outside of the one story that it's rehearsing in that moment, the one thing that it's focusing in that moment. And oftentimes when we're angry or upset or charged, the thing that we're rehearsing in our heads is what has created the anger. So number one tip is to avoid having conversations when you are, emotionally charged, when you're triggered. Do not have the conversation. Go ahead and practice emotional release. Emotional release can come in various different forms. One of them is to go and rehearse the conversation. You don't have to rehearse it with anyone. We oftentimes make the mistake of rehearsing it with a friend, and then we create this cycle of negativity where we start feeding off of each other. It's really unnecessary unless you're trying to get to an insight, to an understanding that you're not able to get on your own. Just rehearsing it with an empty chair, doing it on your own time by yourself is enough, right? Until the emotional, and I mean this in a way of releasing emotionally, right? Once the emotional release has happened, it's totally fine. You can go talk to anyone that you want, but it's most useful to release the actual emotional charge behind it before you have any kind of conversation, even if it is with someone that is not the person that you are having the conflict with. So emotionally release, you can do release writing, you can punch some pillows, you can go do a workout, you can just let some time go by, you can literally have a fight with your chair in the comfort of your home, in the privacy of your home. No one has to see it, no one has to hear it. The most important thing is that you let that emotion express. You let all those feelings come out. Because once they have come out, now your brain has the freedom in this space to process things in a very different way. So I would say that's calming down your nervous system is the number one thing that you should be doing. And also, there's many other things that you could do. You could oftentimes, we do feel very charged, and oftentimes we do show up in a way that's not empowering because we let so much time go by without saying the thing that was on our mind, without really expressing the thing that we wanted to express. And now it has really charged inside of us, and now is like fully has the power of that the repressed power is now like ready to just burst out. So really avoid being silent in avoidance, in like not speak up, because when you do, those emotions will come out in a different way, and perhaps not when you're choosing to do it. The other thing that I would say that's really crucial in effective communication is to always remain curious to what the other person's point of view is. If you can, really try and avoid making a judgment on it. I know that's really difficult, but that is the very thing that typically will even trigger you, right? If you feel like your point of view is being judged, it's not being seen or understood, right? So really try to not do that to someone else. Like really try to put yourself in the other person's shoes and see their point of view. And always remind yourself that we all have a unique lens. We all have a different view of the world, right? Because our view of the world is very much dictated by our own experiences, our own emotions, our own interpretation of the world. So always be reminded of that. There's no point of view that's not right, because everyone has a different point of view. And really try and drop into empathy and compassion, and connect with that when you talk to the other person. Connect with where they're coming from, connect with their pain, connect with their anger, have an understanding that perhaps they're being moved by anger, perhaps they are very uncomfortable in that moment. It always really helps, helps really see the behavior as a reflection of them and not as a reflection of ourselves, right? Because the thing that really charges us, the thing that really triggers us is the fact that we see it as a reflection of ourselves. So the more you remind yourself that it's really very much the other person's baggage, the other person's trigger, the other person's feelings that are creating the behavior or the reaction, what they're saying, and the more you will relieve that from yourself. But okay, what else? Yeah, and then, always also remember when you feel charged by someone's behavior, when you're trying to convey something about someone's behavior that you feel like it wasn't right, take a pause and see what could my part be in this? How could I show up differently? What could I have done differently? What am I learning from this, right? Because sometimes it can also be like, I'm understand. Even when someone does something that's obviously wrong, it can be, okay, perhaps something that I could do differently is to define more clearly what is acceptable to me, define more clearly what I'm willing to do or not do, right? Or speak up more frequently, right? We often just tend to be very black and white and take a stand and really see it as somebody else's responsibility. But when we really take a pause and we're very honest with ourselves, we realize that there always is something that we could do a little differently. There always is a way that we can respond differently. So take ownership of your part. Take ownership of your part, and always really turn that finger towards yourself and see what am I learning? What else can I do differently? And another thing that's really, really effective, and this is something that coaches do really well, is when someone is communicating something to you, even if they're being accusatory, what really helps you and the other person process things is when you reflect back what you just heard. So if someone's telling you something, really reflecting back, I heard you say ... When I heard you say this is how it made me feel. Again, me. Now you made me feel this way. This is how I feel when I hear this. What that does is, like I said, it helps you process things differently, hearing it, out loud, but it helps the person that has just communicated that hear it differently and process it differently. And, and also it helps you check in with the person if you're actually understanding accurately what they're saying, right? Oftentimes the misunderstanding is right there. I'm saying something and the other person hears it through their own filter, and they hear something that it's not really what I meant to say because they're putting it through their own, filter, point of view, their own view of the world, their own hurt, their own, triggers, right? So when you check in with the other person, it gives you both an opportunity to really clarify things. And then, be open to feedback, right? Be open to feedback when someone's giving you feedback. Be open to receive it. Stay curious again. See, okay, I heard you say this, this, and this. I'm going to keep that in mind. I'm going to look into it and I'm going to consider it, right? And then you can always go back. The more you remove, the more you see that as just two different points of view, and the less you're going to be triggered as if someone is defining you, right? Someone is, making you feel less than. Because the more you see it as their point of view, and the more you understand that it's not about you, if that makes any sense. And the other thing that I would say is really, really understand that you cannot impose anything on anyone else, right? The best that you can do is express not your expectations, right? And this is another rule, right? Make agreements and not expectations, not your expectations, but you cannot impose on somebody else to change their mind. You can only express how you feel. You can only express your truth and your own feelings, right? And then leave it to the other person what they're going to do with it, right? But as long as you stick to how you feel about things, as long as you stick to your own truth, no one can really question that, right? Because it's yours. And so that goes back to the concept of always speaking in the I, how I feel, and not you made me, you did this to me, you said this to me, you made me do. Because none all of that goes into the blaming and shaming and accusing. That what it does, it basically prompts the other person to defend themselves, right? So now they're no longer in a conversation with you. They're busy searching in their heads how to defend themselves. And that's the last thing that you want. You want it to be a constructive conversation. You don't want it to be two people defending themselves. And again, make agreements and instead of expectations, right? This is how I would like to show up. This is what I would like you to do. If you're late, I would love it for you to give me a warning. I would love it for you if you could let me know ahead of time so that I can, or if you're not going to show up, I would like for you to give me notice 24 hours before, right? Instead of being like, you didn't even tell me the day before you weren't going to be there, right? It's a completely different way of saying the same exact thing. So I hope that that's making sense. Okay, let me see. How to get rid of, I'm going to read your question, Yuri, how to get rid of limiting beliefs, even though I'm capable and hardworking. I mean, this is a very general question. If there's a more specific, if there's a very specific limiting belief that you would like me to speak to, I can do that. It might be a little more useful, but in general, the way that you get rid of limiting beliefs is by, first of all, seeing them as limiting, right? And how do we know that a belief is limiting? Well, a limiting belief is something that makes you feel disempowered. So any thought, anything that you think of yourself, any belief that you have that makes you feel disempowered, that makes you feel like you're not good at something or capable of doing something, anything that makes you feel limiting is a limiting belief, right? So typically, a really good way to know that is to check in with yourself and see how that feels in your body, right? If I tell you, I'm going to give you an example, for instance, I'm a really bad singer, right? I am likely going to avoid any experience around that, any circumstance where there may be a potential for me to have to sing, right? Because I simply don't believe that I'm a good singer, right? And as I say it, it probably doesn't feel really good, right? I don't feel all proud and happy when I say that, right? It feels a little, and this is a small example. There's not too much attached to it. Some people care, some people don't, but like, I just want to give you a tangible example, right? So if I wanted to, so that's a limiting belief. I'm not a very good singer. If I have the desire to, if I don't care about it, then I don't care about it. It's a limiting belief. It's not really affecting my life. There are many other limiting beliefs that we all have, right? That perhaps need our attention more, right? But if I really would love to pursue a career in singing, then that becomes more relevant, right? So the limiting belief that I'm not a good singer can really, really create a lot of other limiting beliefs around it and a really big sense of disempowerment, right? And so now I want to tackle it, right? How would I tackle it? Well, the way to shift limiting beliefs is by creating a new belief that now feels empowering and it doesn't feel disempowering, right? And typically that new empowering belief is going to be something then down the line of the opposite of what you already believe, right? The problem is that oftentimes the opposite of what you already believe, that you perhaps have believed for a lifetime, we don't believe it, right? It's like, if I go from thinking I'm not a very good singer to like, oh, I'm an amazingly talented singer, we're not going to believe it, right? It's going to be like, yeah, right? We ourselves are not going to believe it. So I often tell my clients to really find a way to that belief, right? To establish what that belief is, right? Just write down the opposite of that. That's our end goal. That's where we want to get. But in order to get there, let's find a middle ground, right? In the middle ground could, through practice, I can become a good singer, right? Now, that's very different than saying, I'm an amazingly talented singer, right? Because that's like where you want to get to, right? And it's not very believable to you. But if you can somehow bring yourself in between the two, when I say, and that's, I'm using this example because it's one of my beliefs, one that I chose not to tackle at the moment because I'm not planning on a career in singing. But when I say with practice, I can become a very good singer, I don't really feel any resistance. And that's the other trick, is to check in when you create the new belief that you would like to believe, is to really check in with yourself. Am I feeling any resistance? Is this believable to me? Is this workable? Can I work with this? Right? And my answer in this case would be yes. Yes, I can believe that through practice, I can become a good singer. Right? And from there, then you start rewiring this belief through, there's many different ways, but again, the brain gets rewired, behaviors get set in through repetition, right? The only way to wire your brain to believe anything new or to do any new task or to automate any new task is through repetition. And so I would have to hear that enough times in order for that belief to become more familiar to me, in order for that belief to become more believable to me, right? The other thing that happens when you start creating that repetition through, it can be through writing it down everywhere, it can be through recording it on your phone and then listening to it a few times a day. That's how hypnotherapy works, through repetition, right? You repeat the thing that you want to start doing, believing, right? And when you hear it enough times, the new belief starts getting rewired, and now it becomes more believable. The resistance goes down, and one day you'll find yourself to believe something completely different, right? So that's how like rewiring beliefs works. I was going to say something else. I lost my train of thought on that, but I hope that this has answered your question, because I think that actually limiting beliefs was on my list of questions that I was going to answer here. Let me think if I can see if there was another question that's going to bring back what I was going to speak to. Yeah, it's not coming back. It will come back and I will speak to it again. Let me see what else I have on here. If you have any other questions, Yuri, go ahead and put them in the chat. Okay, so how to let go of anger. Okay, so how to let go of anger. So how to let go of anger, I would answer that in the same way that I just hinted at just now, in terms of, well, anger is actually a little bit different, but like the first step would be to do emotional release again, right? If I'm really angry, anger is an emotion. The sooner I release the emotion, the sooner I can process what's making me angry, right? The sooner I can think about this situation with a new set of eyes and a new mindset, right? So emotional release is number one. If you're angry, don't repress the anger, acknowledge it, befriend your anger, right? And let it express. Every emotion is there to tell you that something needs to be expressed. So if an emotion comes and the charge is really strong, is there to just A, show you that there's something for you to look at, and B, it wants to be expressed. So by just expressing the anger in a healthy way, right, in a healthy way, you are already removing the charge. And then you can start working on the anger itself, right? The situation, the person that has made you angry, then you can work on that. And again, releasing it, oftentimes we make the mistake of just not intentionally doing that. And so we snap at people. We're just short with our kids, or we just, like yell at the person that cut us off, or like we're just like, we are in that like really angry, uneasy energy, right? That it starts affecting and leaking into all the different things and people in our lives, right? So if you recognize it and see it and accept it for what it is, it's just an emotion that wants to come out and wants to be expressed. Now you can go back and express that in the privacy of your home, in your car, yell at the car, have the conversation, yell at the chair, but to where it's not aimed at someone specifically. It can be aimed at someone specifically, but not at the person physically present, right? Because what you're trying to do is not, I'm not saying don't go and express the thing that has made you angry. I'm just saying let's express the emotion and let's release the charge first, right? So the number one thing to do is to emotionally release that so that you can just now sit with the thing that has made you angry, right? So we're talking about a person again, seeing that the person that has caused you pain or that has made you angry is coming from their own place of hurt, from their own point of view, from their own view of the world already helps, because it helps seeing it as not something that has to do with us, right? It has nothing to do with something being wrong with us, or perhaps even does, but oftentimes what triggers us is the way that's being delivered, for instance, right? So that's a number two is to really see the other person's point of view. Really try and like remove yourself from the situation and get into the observer's view. See that the other person, like you can just pretend to be the other person and see if you can understand where they come from. See if you can see where the reactiveness came from. See if you can connect with their pain, if you can connect with their anger, if you can connect with their discomfort, right? So that's number two. Number three, forgiveness, right? The forgiveness piece doesn't mean condoning the behavior. The forgiveness piece doesn't mean I'm just going to bypass and let it go. I'm just going to avoid dealing with it. The forgiveness piece is there again to release the feelings of resentment and anger, right? Because once the anger has come in and has told you, there's something that bothered me, there's something that has crossed my boundaries, it's something that I find wrong, it's not in alignment with me, I didn't like it, whatever it is, right? The important piece is that message that you didn't like it, that's not aligned with you, that's not acceptable for you, right? But we oftentimes sit in anger because we keep rehearsing it, right? We keep rehearsing it and we're not letting it go. We're not forgiving the person, right? And this piece of forgiveness can only come in once you're able to have compassion for the other person, once you're able to see their point of view, once you're able to see that they're coming from their own pain or hurt or their own baggage, right? And so really practicing forgiveness, really being able to drop into the energy of forgiveness is now allowing you to see things differently, to resolve the situation in a more effective way, to have communicate in a more effective way. And so the forgiveness piece is actually crucial in this. And the other two pieces need to be done, right? The emotional release and seeing the other person's point of view. They need to come first so that you are actually able to forgive, right? And sometimes depending on what the thing is that is charging you, that's making you angry, it can take a few times doing this practice of forgiving, right? One thing that really helps me very much in forgiving people is really seeing the child in the other person, because oftentimes people's dysfunction, anger, pain comes from it was formed in childhood, was formed, is the child within them that's suffering, is the child within them that has unresolved stuff that's preventing them from showing up differently, right? And so I really practice this. I really practice seeing the person that's in front of me in their pain as a child who doesn't know how to show up any differently, right? I always say we're like adults with the maturity of a 5-year-old, right? Because that's very much what's acting out in the background. Is not the 40, 50, 60-year-old person. It's the unresolved stuff that they've been carrying their entire lives, and that was often formed in childhood. So that's something that has really helped me forgive some pretty serious stuff. And again, forgiveness doesn't mean condoning, right? You can forgive and then sit down and now in an empowered brain state, uh, think about how to approach the situation. Being angry or resentful is never empowering, is never creating the best solution, it's never creating the best outcome. It's never really coming across in the way we would like it to solve the situation, or really even doesn't really even allow the other person to hear us in the way we deserve to be heard, that we want to be heard. So I hope that helps. Let me see. How can we stop ourselves from being triggered? That's a very good question. Well, how can we stop ourselves from being triggered? We can see the trigger as a messenger, right? So the first thing that you can do when you're being triggered is not judge the trigger, not get angry at the trigger, but really pause, right? Pause and see the trigger for what it is. It's a messenger. The trigger is just delivering a message to you. The important piece is that the being able to pause, right? Like some things are more triggering than other things, right? If the trigger is really strong, it may take a few tries to stop the trigger, right? Sometimes those triggers are like ingrained within the dynamic that we have within a relationship, right? And those are oftentimes the hardest ones to stop. But having that piece of awareness already that it is a trigger, I am being triggered in on itself, is the starting point. Because now you know that you are triggered in that moment. It's not you. This is not who I am. There's something that's triggering me. And one thing that really helps with that too is also to be grateful to the trigger, right? Thank you for reminding me that this is a place where I need to still look in. This is a place where I still have some work to do, right? And sometimes, the trigger comes and we can't really do anything about it in the moment, right? And it's important to accept that for the time being. I'm not saying you're destined to be triggered forever, but for the time being, accept the fact that in this moment I got triggered, or like I got triggered, I didn't even realize I was triggered. I reacted, I did the whole sequence that I don't want to do, right? The trigger came, the reaction came, and now the guilt is there because now I feel bad that I reacted because I was triggered, right? So it's really important to shift your perspective and shift your mindset and see things a little bit differently. The trigger came, I reacted, and now I know I still need to work on this. Now I know I need to look a little bit deeper into this. Now I know I need to find ways that are more effective for me not to react, right? One way to not be so susceptible to triggers is to really make sure that you take care of yourself, to really make sure that you're always emotionally in a good place by doing emotional release, by meditating, by making sure that you get enough sleep, by making sure that you see your own needs, you acknowledge your own needs, you acknowledge your own pain sometimes even, right? And also by not rehearsing it, by not feeling guilty, by not staying in it and beating yourself up, right? Because the guilt and this feeling like you didn't do it the way you wanted to and like rehearsing it, it only carves that path. You're just running a loop, right? You continue to run the loop, that you continue to run that program that you're trying to break, right? What I just described is like the event happens, or the person says something, you get triggered, and then you react. That's a loop. You're running a program, right? So what we want to do is interrupt that. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's a little bit harder, right? In those situations where the awareness is there, but you can't really control it, There, you gain nothing from feeling guilty, from beating yourself up, from rehearsing it. You're just, the rehearsal of it, the feeling bad about it, is just recarving that same path. So what we want to do is to give it as little attention as possible in terms of the rehearsal. We just want to see it. Now I see it, acknowledge it, take note, and now I'm going to flip it, right? But you're not going to be able to do any of that if what you're doing is feeling guilty and rehearsing it, because all that does is keeps the charge going, keeps the charge growing, right? It just feeds the weeds, feeds the part that you're trying to get rid of. So be kind to yourself. That compassion, that understanding that I was talking about, that, you know, that's necessary in communication with others. One really good way to practice that is to do that towards ourselves, is to practice that with ourselves. Be kind to yourself. Understand that you're just running a program that's been installed a long time ago and it's been running for a long time, right? It will take some time to uninstall it and install something new. Just be very patient with yourself. Be very understanding, because beating yourself up is not pushing you to do it differently next time. It's not going to force you to not react next time. It's simply recarving that path, is reinforcing it. So I can't say that enough times. Don't spend any time in rehearsing and feeling triggered. Just accept it for what it is. Shift your brain state, shift your attitude towards being grateful that you see it, being grateful that is delivering a very important message to you. And once you see the message, and you, if you remain curious and you start digging and you start asking powerful questions about it, where did it come from? What about it triggered me? What in this is being triggered? What's being triggered in me, right, in this situation? It's hard for me to generally speak about it because I don't have an actual example, unless you, but you know, like, what is this trying to tell me, right? What is the feeling? What is the feeling that I have that feels uncomfortable? Because the trigger is triggering an emotion. It's triggering something within us that's hurt. What's the hurt? When else have I felt this way in my life, right? So when the trigger comes, the response is a reaction that you don't like. You may not be able to do this in the moment. Acceptance, right? Being kind and compassionate towards yourself. And then later on, when you're out of the rehearsal, when you're out of feeling triggered, when you're out of the emotion, so you have emotionally released, ask some really important questions, right? For as long as there are unresolved emotions within us, the trigger is going to stay. If there's a trigger, there's something in there that needs to be resolved. There's something in there that needs to be looked at, right? And oftentimes, really seeing where this has started, we remove that trigger from a lot of different things. You go from having 100 triggers to having maybe 50, right? Because when we start digging and going back and looking, really looking at it, taking a close look, we can always bring it back to one or two or three different emotions that are being triggered within us, you know, beliefs, right? Feelings of not enoughness, of abandonment, of not being seen and heard, right? So those are very much the basic ones that they all go back to, right? So what can you do about it? Guess what? If the feeling is of not enoughness, not being seen or heard, start by seeing yourself. Start by hearing it. Start by hearing yourself, hearing what is it that I need? What would it help me feel different, right? If I don't feel heard, feeling heard would be, right, how I'm going to solve that. So we just like tend to go and want that from everybody else outside of ourselves. But guess what? You can give that to yourself as well, right? You can have that kind of kindness and presence with yourself. And it starts by doing what I'm describing, right? Remaining curious towards yourself, being kind to yourself, not being so hard on yourself, not judging yourself, not rehearsing things and getting angry with yourself, right? If you want to be, if you want to have more powerful relationships, to work on your relationships, the first relationship you need to work on is the one with yourself. If you want to be heard and seen, the first person that needs to see you and hear you is yourself. And so really take that trigger as a gift that is helping you see things within yourself that need your attention, that need to come to the surface and be expressed. And when you see things this way, it completely shifts the way you feel about it, right? When you realize that there is no point, there is absolutely nothing to be gained in staying in that place of guilt and shame and anger and rehearsal, that instead the work to be done, it comes from a place of compassion and understanding and curiosity, and like really putting like an investigator hat on, then you're completely shifting what that trigger means for you, to you in your life. So I hope that this answered your question, Asan. Okay, so let me see, you have another question here. The second one was the same. Okay, how can we, well, I feel like, I spoke to that a little bit, right? How can we improve self-love or start loving ourselves, right? The very first step is what I just described, like compassion and understanding towards yourself. And you know what really helps with starting on that? Connect with the younger you. Connect with the child within you. One thing that really helps with creating that connection is perhaps, go find a picture of you as a kid. Go find a picture of you as a kid and really, really connect to that kid. Really, really try and see the world through the eyes of that child that you were, and try to put yourself in your own shoes when you were a child, right? For very good reasons, like we relate to children in a very different way, right? We don't expect them to see the world and know things the way we expect from people, from adults, right? And so if you really practice connecting to the child within you, you'll see that you're going to start shifting the way that you see you, the way that you show up for you, right? So that's a starting point, really not being so hard on yourself. And again, this being hard on ourselves, being so judgmental towards ourselves, is something that was carved in, wired in when we were little. Is something that we modeled from our parents, from our teachers, from society, from conditioning, right? And we have to go back and rewire a new way of seeing things, a new way of showing up for ourselves, right? So that's the first step, having compassion for yourself, starting to love yourself as if you were loving a child, right? Do things that feed your soul, do things that make you happy, right? And when the guilt comes in, say thank you, not today. There is nothing, and I know that that's something that takes time. If you always feel guilty about doing things for yourself, it takes time to rewire that as well, right? So really stay curious, really accept that some feelings are going to be there for a while, but that better, right? Write it down, write down a plan. And when the voice comes in that tells you, well, you shouldn't be spending time or money, for yourself. You shouldn't be doing this. Bring yourself back to the list, right? Bring yourself back to the list. What feeds me? What can I do for my body, for my soul, for my emotional needs? What makes me happy? What is fun, right? Really start by writing down a list of all the things that you would love. Start dreaming. Dream for a moment. Write down things that you like to do. Is it a massage? Is it going on a hike? Is it going to the beach? Is it eating a really, really tasty meal? Is it watching something that feeds you intellectually? Is it spending time with people that you love, right? For me personally, I can share what that is for me, where all of this starts growing and taking a different shape. For me, starts with taking care of my body, right? Taking care of my actual biological needs, right? What time I go to bed, um, what I do when I wake up. I start with meditation. I make sure that I keep my body healthy. So I go to the gym. I eat healthy, right? Like it starts with the body. I surround myself with people that feed me intellectually, that are loving towards me, that have those behaviors that I want to see in others and in myself, right? But I didn't get there in one day. It all started by sitting down and writing some notes and establishing what those things were for me, establishing what mattered to me, establishing what was important to me, right? Is it a book? Is it a vacation? How can I make this vacation happen? Like really value yourself in the things that you want to do, right? And when the guilt comes in, remind yourself of the reason why you're doing this. Because when you feed yourself, when you love yourself, that's how you show up for everybody else. You show up as a loving person, you show up as a fulfilled person. You model that for your children, you model that for your partner, you model that for your loved ones. So if you can't just do it for you, maybe you can just Jedi mind trick your brain and tell yourself, I need to do it so that everybody else around me can benefit from it. I need to do this so that I can model this for my children. I need to do this so that they can learn to do it for themselves. I need to do this so that my partner does that for himself, right? Or for me, right? Um, it really all starts with a slight shift in mindset, finding ways to bring yourself to think differently, finding ways to feed thoughts that serve you versus thoughts that don't serve you. And the way that you know that something is not serving you is because you have an immediate reaction in your body. You immediately feel resistance. You immediately um, feel disempowered, right? What feels empowering to you, right? Can you, for a moment, drop all conditioning, all judgment, all of the what ifs and the shoulds and shouldn'ts, and just dream like a child and write down, what would I love to have, feel, do, see, experience, be in my life, right? It really starts from reflecting on it, right? Nothing happens in our lives unless we have clarity around it, right? The moment we create clarity in our brain, our reticular activating system starts working on its own. It's an amazing system that we have set up in here, right? Create the clarity, and then don't worry about all of the things that you need to do, all of the things that you need to implement, all of the things that you need to change. What's the smallest step that you can take? What is the absolute smallest step that you can take? And start from there, because one step is going to lead to the next, to the next, to the next, and to the next. Okay, let me see what you're writing here. I'm living with people who are a bit toxic, my sister, so I have to face them every day. So it's getting a bit difficult for me. Plus, I have multiple sclerosis. It's important for me to avoid stress. I'm really sorry to hear that. And I hear you. It must be really, really difficult to experience this, in this situation. Okay, my doorbell is ringing because I'm a little bit over time. I think my children are here. But, I wanted to say that, again, always remember that you are in control of your emotions and how you experience life. Always remember that where you focus is how you're going to experience life. What you choose to feed is what's going to be your experience of it. And there's nothing that you can do about somebody else's toxicity other than choosing how much of it you're going to let in, how much of it you're willing to expose yourself to. And I know that there's a lot more that I could say about this, and I realize how difficult this must be. I realize that it's a lot more complicated than that, and I want to invite you to reach out to me directly if you want. I'll be happy to talk to you more about this. I'm running out of time now, but I'm available if you want to connect with me and talk to me some more about this. I hope that what I shared was helpful. I tried to answer as many questions as I could. I have so many more, but we're running out of time. And my kids are knocking on my door as we speak because they got back from school. So I have to go. But I will put my info here for you so that you can reach out to me and we'll have a more private conversation about this. Here we go. Okay, so if you go on that link, you'll find all my information. You'll find a way to book a 15-minute conversation with me. You can email me, whatever works for you. I really feel your challenge. It's not my challenge, but I can't even imagine what you must be going through, and I would love to talk to you. Anyway, you're very welcome. Everybody else, thank you. I will leave it at this. Reach out to us. You know where to find us. All our handles are still the same. We'll be posting the new show name and time. And like I said, it's likely going to be on Wednesdays at the same time and same links, but we're gonna have a new look and a new name. The new name is going to be An Honest Look, and Rick is gonna be back with me as well in the next episode. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you all there. Reach out to us with any questions or comments and feedback, and love you. And I'll see you soon. Ciao.